was able to modify my framework and make it even better. And this was all because I started early and requested early because people are busy and you have to realize you have to start early. Do not wait. And trust me, I'm going to make a prediction. You're going to write it down because, and then you can message me if it actually happens. From June, July, and August, you will find on your mailing list requests for people to fill out their surveys. It will grow up. You will see it on Facebook, you will see it on the WMG. I'm going to tell you this. If you try that, at that stage, in June, July, and August, I think you deserve to get whatever mark you get. Because I'm saying that now, do not wait until that is that late to request people to fill out a survey. It should be done way in advance, early. Now, there's a technique here, reports. It's a very good way to get actually data. I found it, especially if I'm doing stuff on critical incident reports, scenarios, or particulars, they all come in handy. Okay? The advantage of asking for a report is that it allows someone to tell you what happens in their own words. It gives them to show how they organize their thoughts and rational actions and behaviors. And this also gives you an understanding of an organization's approach to doing something. Alright? But of course, there are risks associated with reports, but there are ways around them. With reports, you get something called sanitized accounts, something that is just designed for public, but doesn't tell you the true picture. So what you get away around it is sometimes you can ask somebody to do a report on someone else's behavior. It is easier for someone to write about another person than to write about themselves. That is something you have to recognize. Interference effects. It's when we do something called think aloud. It all depends because I'm not sure of the composition, like what your research projects are. So I have some of my statements will be taken as that can seem generic, but then they come very specific. For some of us, if you're doing like a case study and we want to try a new method, we may ask someone to think aloud what you're doing, and we make notes about it. And you get to get in the green of doing the task. So we have to sort of compare the performance of that person while reporting what they're doing, and then compare the performance of them doing the task but not reporting. So it's something that we use in ethnography, as well as in action research methodologies, which I mentioned from earlier. Coding, partially coding results. Because of the complexity of the topic, I couldn't cover all the data analysis tools. I won't be able to, it has to be a second topic, a second lecture. Coding results. When you get a report, you have to start coding. You have to read it and set up what they're saying and looking at the repetition of the things that they say in the report. You may be partial on a particular topic that you're reading in a report. And so it's often good to get an independent judge to code it. Again, so you're not asking someone else to provide assistance in your project. So that's another person you have to manage. So again, so there are risks when using reports, but there are ways around it. And if you identify that your risk of particular aspects and show how you got around it, it shows your mastery, your skills at getting particular research skills, and increases your chances of getting distinction. A strong running chapter could do you wonders. I know it can do lots of wonders. Now, because reports depend on people remember about their memory, short-term and long-term memory, it is advisable, some homework again, to read upon how reports are used dealing with past events, current activities, and scenarios. Because, especially if you plan to use reports and you're asking people to do certain things. You would also want to look at readable psychology on some short-term memory and long-term memory. I'm not saying you gotta get a big science textbook. Get some reading, get some background, so you demonstrate a sort of understanding of the techniques. Alright. Now, reports. Next one's observations. I use reports. I've also used observations in my thesis. I'm identifying things that you could use, and sometimes comes in very handy to support the common ones that most of my colleagues use. Surveys and interviews. They are not the only way of doing your research. If your research is dependent solely on surveys, you have to come with some really good data and some really good justification why. Alright? So we have two types, direct observation and indirect observations, but there are ethical questions, of course, that comes up in both of them. The direct observation, when you watch someone, it's often called disclosed participant observation. I'll use this technique. It is that the participants know that you are collecting the data. And you use this especially for task analysis. It depends again what project you're doing. If you're doing a computer science project, we'll be dealing with stuff with into e-commerce, using software. You might want to, this is something that is used a lot. And you're using a task analysis. With the task analysis, you observe someone doing the task and doing the task separately from each other, looking for regularities and errors and efficiencies or inefficiencies in how they perform the task. This sort of task analysis can be used when you're using the MOC. Those of us who have MOC, that's simulation, where you have, I think D teaches it with the game, and where you have to, I think you all know MOC, and you had to make these various products. And you will observe people, which person is the fastest builder. That's task analysis. You are doing participant, you're observing how someone is actually, on who moves the fastest, and you organize, you will optimize your layout to ensure that you can produce the most amount of products for sale. So this is the sort of stuff that you will see, participant observation, and you make decisions out of it. And the advantage is that you can gather the data only, of course, so they know that's happening. You get to see what is normal behavior. But the thing is, you won't know what is normal behavior if you've been accepted as a member of the group. If you're not, then you can be presented what's called a sanitized version. And this is the thing that happens in every research method, regardless of whatever you take. There is that point of where the idea of putting there something that's sanitized. They're only just seeing what they want you to see and not seeing the true picture unless you're accepted into the group. You may find yourself getting emotionally attached to something that's being studied. And that happens when you're doing data analysis. When you're writing up your report, and you may find yourself wanting to adjust the way you say something because it makes the group look, doesn't make them look good, but you're going to attach them. So you have to recognize that when you're doing participant observation. This one, I have to bring this one up. This is one we don't as master students use it unless it is used in undercover security and intelligence work. Undisclosed participant observation. They don't know you're being observed. So you can gather data very easily without sanitized version, but the ethics and risk because you're doing something here. As a master student, you can't just go into a group and just collecting data without them knowing. It's magical. And again, you also have that emotional attachment that comes from being part of a group. As such. And this is my very reports. I mentioned that you should read over psychology. It's important to understand that when you use a particular techniques, you have to understand the psychological aspects of it for yourself and for how you interact with your research subjects. That is very important. I believe some of that we have been covered in terms of how you interact with people, teamwork, in PPMC. I believe leadership should cover some of that, MOC. So number of courses that you will take, or modules you will take over the year, kind of prepares you for dealing with things that you will come up in your research design, in terms of your research methods, and when you're collecting data, how you interact with people. Okay, I hope I'm not going too fast for you, but just making sure I stick within the time limit I've set. Right? Interviews. I've talked about reports and observations. Understand, with reports, when you check the notes for reports, there are a number of tasks, there are a number of things I spoke about, or did not speak about, but are in there for you to go back and read them and to look at scenarios, critical incident reports, think aloud, laddering. To research on those techniques, because they are often used as a better way, a better technique that interviews are. And so you should look at that. Okay, observations are not a good way of using it. You should look at that as well. But interviews, they're very tricky. Well, they are still a nice way, a bit fun. It's still a way that they use to interact with each other. It's using a natural language, and it's happening in real time. Opposed to reports, sometimes reports are because of a delay. But in fact, preparing for an interview, you need to ensure that you do the requisite background reading, training, and piloting. What does that mean? If you're going to interview someone from a particular organization, you will have most likely did your reading about the organization. If there's public information about the person you're going to interview, you will hopefully get some background information to sort of get a sense of how you would reach out to this person. You're going to practice and practice and practice your interviewing to make sure it goes well. So you're going to be trained, read up on how to do interviews, and you practice with your friends. Again, I'm stressing with practice a lot. Okay? Interview types. Okay, so there are what we call interview types. So you can decide, you can, what we call is wing it. You can wing it as an unstructured interview. No predetermined sequence, and you just decide how you're going to interview. If you wish to do that, you can try, but again, you have to be skilled at that and know exactly what you want to do. If it's semi-structured, it's a halfway point. You have gone in there with some questions, but you leave some parts for interesting topics at home. And that's a good tactic as well, especially if you want to get something off the top. Implicit knowledge that needs to be released that may have come up when they feel a bit more enthusiastic and be willing to talk. Because sometimes you have to recognize some people might be interviewed are very talkative and others are very quiet. But it helps that you're recording. Alright? Now, helps that if you're recording the interview, it will be a really good thing to do, unless you go back and check. Structured interviews. This one sometimes is more like a survey, but it is having it a list of topics, a list of questions, and you follow along exactly what you're doing with the interview. So sort of like a guide. There's no ums and ahs on your part. If it's from the respondent, it's good, but if you not so good. The big thing I will always ask is, why should people do an interview? Why do you even want to do an interview? Because every research method that you select, you have to ask yourself, why am I doing it? What is the advantage of it? What are the disadvantages? How do I get around it? So when you interview, there are no restrictions. We call it, let's say, it's a very nice way to poke around, to actually ask questions and to find out what's out there, what's not there. It just basically asks them almost anything you want. And getting, but you're not just asking them anything you want, but act it in such a way it helps you to answer the questions that you need to get an answer. It's not better to just talk, but it's also better to make sure you get answers for your research question. And this is not in low-level skills. If you're a social person, it works well for you. If you're not, practice, or use a different method so that you don't necessarily have to do interviews. And of course, I said there are better techniques available. And of course, the better techniques, and this is the list I was referring to as well. I cannot go into all of them because of the time constraint, but they are only the notes I sent already to Kelly, and hope she will distribute to everyone. And these are techniques you can use instead of interviewing if you do not like to do interviews or you don't want to do interviews. But it still involves, some of them still involves you getting interactive with your research subject, to think aloud, observational laddering. It's really nice, especially if you're doing present data. But if you're looking at things from the past or the future, critical incidents, hard case techniques and scenarios are pretty good as well. The laddering is a nice one I found. I think I demonstrated that earlier when I'll show you how you do it. But laddering is tricky in terms of how you use your referencing for that. Was this guy Hinkle? And the actual technique for laddering, well, he invented it as in a thesis in an American university. But there are a number of books that have talked about it, so you can say reference the book that talks about laddering, and not Hinkle himself. Questionnaires. Now, interviews is popular. Questionnaires is by far the most popular one and the biggest risk of all. It is, seriously, when I hear the word questionnaire, my blood pressure should not rise, but sometimes it does, because this is exactly what I ask myself when I see a question in my email or a question on my Facebook newsfeed. I'm not a questionnaire, but it has its advantages. As much as I may not like questionnaires, it is still advantageous to do if it is done correctly. You do it correctly and justify why you did that, have a good design, and it's one of the best methods available, provided it is done correctly. Alright, questionnaires are very easy. Alright? What it does, it is think of questionnaires as a way to reinforce a lot of data you're collecting. You have found some information, like through critical incident technique or passive observations, and you just want to see how widespread this is, so you try a questionnaire, which allows you to collect that data, that peripheral data. With questionnaires, you need to have your questions prepared beforehand. You need to ensure that the questions, do not put questions in your questionnaire that is not necessary. The worst thing you can do is to have questions that just does not help you answer your research questions. Asking someone their age should not be on a question unless it's absolutely necessary. Okay? So we've got to make sure you have the right questions. The phrasing of the question, if it's written in a way that doesn't make sense, and it's very difficult to understand, obviously, they won't answer it. And this one, phrasing of the question, when phrasing it, and when you pilot it, when you test it with a test subject. I have seen questionnaires come into production, by called production, there's test and production, that has been released onto the Facebook group, released into the WMG's mailing list, and the errors on it still. That person didn't test it. You have to also know how you can identify and validate the responses for each question. And that's why it's very important. If you have the right question in the first place, then it's easier for you to identify and how you can validate them. Now, I've said, is it the only choice for data collection. There, it should not be. Whether it is, look at your research design again and see if you can use other methods as well. And I will again advise, there are lots of books on design, questionnaire design. It's an easy tool to use, but very easy to mess up. And that is one of the big things of turn on. Here's a little thing I asked to have you decide if you want to do questionnaires. When a questionnaire comes in your email or shows up on your news feed, do you answer it? When a questionnaire pops up on a website, do you answer it? If yes, you answer it every single time, then you're one of those special volunteers who every question person wants. If no, then I want you to answer the second question. What will make your questionnaire even different from all the other questionnaires that have been sent to you and that you haven't answered it? And so this question you must ask yourself, and that just explains one of the disadvantages of questionnaires: very low response rate. And that is why it shouldn't, that's one of the big things on why it shouldn't be your only method to collect data. Sometimes when you send a questionnaire, you may actually have people who might decide for fun to give you bogus answers. Oh my, and something like if you're bored on a Saturday, there's nothing on the telly. Why not answer this questionnaire that we see and think of the most hilarious or nonsensical thing to put in there? So you have low responses and unhelpful responses. Yeah, that's affecting your credibility of your data connection already if you use a questionnaire. But as I said, it's good for finding out ancillary data like peripheral information, so that surrounds what you're researching and how widespread something is. But it should not be your only choice. Better techniques, of course. I'm not just going to tell you don't do something without advising you on the techniques to look at. And the reason I'm thinking is that these are all the risks that you're finding with your research design. And you have to be thinking of these actively when you're choosing every one of them. With your questions, you must ask yourself, what will this question give me? What answer? How is it going to, what's its purpose? You have to justify every question that you put in your questionnaire. Could you back it up with some literature, some reference to why this question makes sense to be in your questionnaire? Clear and ambiguous phrasing. Check it, have someone check it, even if English is your native language, have someone else look at it. Your length of this and layout. If a question takes long, if it takes 30 minutes to fill out, by the time you reach down to the end, especially if all other good stuff you want to find out is at the end, well, chances are they will have all leave it blank because they weren't fed up answering the question. And how you put in your responses? You're going to put in text, select options, numbers, analog Likert styles. Analog Likert style scales means in non-decimal, something like a 0 to 5, 1 to 7. Again, you could read up on this particular type of it. As I said, there are books on question design dedicated to how you design questionnaires. Read it. And